Hi, everyone. This on? Really good to be here. My name's Tiago. And this talk is going to be really different from every other talk here because I'm not a React developer. In fact, I'm not a software developer at all. I've never written one, well, maybe besides some basic HTML, I've never written code. What I do is I'm a productivity anthropologist. I embed myself in communities, the design community, the tech startup community, and most recently, the software development community, and I learn how you do things. I study you like an anthropologist. Then I take the ways that you do things, the methods that you have of getting things done, and I translate them for normal people. I turn that into books, blog posts, and online courses teaching normal people how to be as productive as software developers and designers and startups. I want to start off talking about flow, also known as the experience of flow or the psychology of flow. Kind of kills my momentum. So this was coined by Csikszentmihalyi, who defined it as a mental state of operation in which a person performing an activity is fully immersed in a feeling of energized focus, full involvement, and enjoyment in the process of the activity. You know what I'm talking about. It's when you get so deep into a book that the characters on the page seem more real than the world around you. Or when you're playing a sport that you're actually good at, and your thoughts and your actions seem to fuse into one, and you lose all self-criticism, all self-awareness as you get into the flow of the sport. Or obviously, when you are coding, when you're deep in the bowels of writing your program, and all of the information, all of the problem is at your mental fingertips. You know exactly everything you need to solve the problem. And I think one of the issues with how we talk about flow is we talk about it like it's a mystical experience, like it's a quasi-religious, like the god of flow descends upon us, when actually the science of flow, which is called transient hypofrontality in the literature, is very well understood. Okay, it's just a sequence of neurochemicals. Norepinephrine tightens focus. Dopamine improves pattern recognition. Anandamide improves lateral thinking. Nitric oxide suppresses the stress response, so that relief you feel as you really get into it, it's nitric oxide flooding your bloodstream. And of course, endorphins, which is the reward, the payoff at the end, gives you that sense of inner peace and tranquility. And the thing I want to point out about flow is that it represents the intersection of positive experience, performance, and learning. Right? This is why Holy Grail is the flow is the holy grail of productivity. Right? You don't have to choose just one of these or just two. You get three when you're in that state of flow. Now, probably up until now, no surprise, right? I don't have to tell you how great flow is. I don't have to tell you, yeah, you should get into flow. But now I'm going to get a bit controversial, okay? Because I think the typical way that people try to create flow, things such as avoiding interruptions and distractions, in other words, people, long, uninterrupted stretches of focus time, single tasking, time boxing, back-to-back sprints, and managing a lot of work in process in your head, these are outdated. This is an old paradigm that's not going to continue into the future. All of these ways of working, which are very well-known, productivity tips and approaches to productivity, are all what I call heavy lifts. Okay, a heavy lift is what it sounds like. It's this big, long, hard slog of work, of you just getting through this massive amount of work in one big push. Okay? Now, there are times and places for heavy lifts, definitely. Right? Sometimes the problem cannot be decomposed. The module cannot be decomposed. You have to take on the whole thing. But I think if you think that the only way to produce value, the only way to get into flow is a heavy lift, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be in trouble because heavy lifts are socially isolating. They take you away from people. They're very hard on your body and your mind. It's one thing to do a heavy lift every day in your 20s. Wait until you're in your 30s or your 40s, okay? Kind of at the level of the group or the level of the organization, heavy lifts are this idea that the developer is supposed to be heads down in their little box, just laboring on the problem. It actually takes developers out of positions of influence and leadership. If you haven't seen the book Developer Hegemony by Eric Dietrich, I really recommend it. He talks about some of the political and social implications of this situation. I think heavy lifts actually have the effect on businesses of taking developers away from the business side, away from the human side, away from the leadership side, where your expertise, your logical way of thinking, your practicality is so needed, more than ever. Okay, I think heavy lifts are not the only way to get things done. And it's interesting, when you look at the science, the research on what produces flow, there's internal triggers, clear goals, immediate feedback, and a challenge to skill ratio where it's hard enough to be challenging so you don't get bored, but not so difficult that you give up, right? So a certain challenge to skill ratio. And there's external triggers, the presence of risk. There has to be some risk, deep embodiment, and a rich environment, okay? There's nothing in here, if you'll notice, about any span of time. There's no research, as far as I know, and if you find anything, please send it to me. There is no indication that you need a huge block of time to get into flow. There just is not. I think that's a legacy of an old way of working where we had a huge block of time called an 8-hour workday, and so we assumed an 8-hour block of time was necessary, okay? And here's the thing, I know that you've experienced this, right? I know you've experienced many times where you sat down, and for some reason, the environment, the people you're working with, the nature of the problem, the tools you have, you just drop straight into flow, right? You don't need this long setup phase. You don't need 6 hours of focus, right? What I'm saying is some of those factors can be planned. Because flow is an actual neurochemical phenomenon, we can plan it, we can encourage it, we can design for it. And to kind of get a little more specific, what I want to do, so my mission basically is to do for knowledge work what has been done for software development over the past few decades, right? So I want to make knowledge work, and I don't mean just one activity, all knowledge work, stateful, encapsulated, reusable, and composable. Okay, and at this point, I'm going to ask you to sort of maybe take off your software developer hat and think of yourself for just the next 20 minutes as a knowledge worker. Okay? So you do coding. Coding is knowledge work, right? But there are so many. I don't care if you're the most specialized, focused developer in the world. There's so many activities that you do, right? You have conversations, you have meetings, you plan, you brainstorm, you make drawings, you learn, you read things, you watch videos. I mean, the job of being a software developer is this incredible variety of different types of knowledge work, different ways of working with information. So think of yourself for now just as an overall knowledge worker. And as I think you well know, knowledge work today is like a big blob. Just think of knowledge workers all around the world, most of them. They sit down and their work has no parts, it has no clear edges. So in order to make any progress, they have to load up the whole blob into their head just to be able to do one thing, right? Just like programming used to be, right? Programming used to be the effort of a genius who would load up the whole program into their mind, and now you have a different way of working with software, which is in parts, in modules, in components. That's what I want to do for knowledge work. So let's look at these one at a time. What would it look like? What does it even mean for knowledge work to be stateful? And as I was saying, I want you to think about, so there's a misconception that your work is made up of tasks, right? I might ask you, show me your work, and you point to your to-do list. I think that's a misconception. Your to-do list is not your work, right? It refers to your work. It points to your work, right? If I destroyed your to-do list, would all your work be destroyed? No. Your work is actually made up of content. It's like producing content. Sure, there's the code base, there's documentation, but I'm talking about way more than that. Think of everything you create along the way. All the intermediate work in process, right? You might have specs, you might have wireframes, user stories, you might have notes on your daily stand-ups or your sprint retrospectives. Going even further back, you might have drawings, architectural diagrams, flow charts. Going even further back, the books you read, the podcasts you listen to, the drawing on the back of a napkin in a restaurant. Who knows what it is, right? This is the content that you're producing in your work, and this is what I think is the real value of knowledge work, right? This intermediate work that usually gets used and then kind of just thrown aside. We don't really keep track of it. It's just kind of, oh, that's just intermediate work. So no talk on productivity would be complete without 5 steps. Right? There must be 5 steps. So the last part of my talk is going to be, the 5 weird tricks for you to make your work, not just your software development work, stateful, encapsulated, reusable, and composable. Step 1 is you got to collect it. Okay? We've been for many years on this decentralization trend, right? There's an app for everything. Every little thing you want to do, there's an app. But what I think that hides from us is the fact that you are, even if you don't think so, you're producing huge amounts of content. Huge. And I teach a course on this where I lead people through this process. And I'm just, time and time again, I'm amazed that people, once they collect all of their content together, like photos, web pages, different snippets of text, handwritten notes, book notes, voice memos, they're shocked how much is there. Right? They're completely shocked how much incredible content they've produced. So you got to get it all in one place, right? It's no good. You won't be able to make connections between things to see what relates to what if they're all spread out in a million different tools. What would it look like to make knowledge work encapsulated? So once you've collected all this information, you have to break it up into small packets with clean edges, okay? This is, I think, the big flaw in current knowledge management approaches, right? If you look at wikis, you look at knowledge bases, you look at that one Google Doc at your work where like all of the user research is stored, and just like loading up that Google Doc takes like 5 minutes. Right? There's no clean edges. It's not packets. It's more like streams, really big streams where you don't know where it begins, you don't know where it ends. It's difficult to extract one little section out and combine it with something else. It's difficult to point someone directly to one point in the document, right? I think we have to move to a paradigm that is much closer to packets, right? Just like the internet moved from basically phone lines to DSL, moved from streams of audio data to packet switching networks, we need to do the same for knowledge work. And that involves breaking it up into little pieces. And I'll say more about that in a second. And there's a lot of different tools you could use. You could use cloud storage tools. You can use repositories. You can use wikis, all these things. But there's one category of tools that I've found is really ideally suited for this, which is note-taking apps. I know it's not very sexy. It's not very cool and trendy, but apps like Evernote, which is the one I use and recommend, but also Bear, Simple Note, OneNote, and Google Keep. Most people don't even know that Google has a note-taking app, right? I think are ideally suited for this because the best paradigm for managing our content as knowledge workers is notes, right? Notes, not documents, not files, not folders. Notes, which are personal, informal, quick and dirty. They're open-ended and never finished. You have low expectations. You don't have to make them super perfect, perfectly formatted, perfectly structured. And they mix diverse types of media, right? Even when notes were on paper, you can imagine making a drawing, making a sketch, pasting in a photo, writing something. If it's digital, putting a video. Notes very naturally include all different types of media. All of this while maintaining one discrete unit, which is the note, right? A note. What does it look like to make knowledge work reusable? So once you have these modules, you can't go, oh, I have lots of content modules. That's great. You have to give them clean interfaces, right? Legos only work because they're like measured down to the micromillimeter, and any two Legos in the world will fit together, right? Very clean interfaces. For content, what this looks like is metadata. And these are just examples. This can take many different forms. These are more specific to text, but there's different metadata for images, for video, as you know. Everything from informative titles, naming conventions, thematic tags, summaries, comments and annotations, formatting, links and images, right? Each one of these modules needs to be described in a way that you can quickly get the gist of it, so you can see whether you want to combine it with other modules of content. Step 4 is to organize, right? Until we have true artificial intelligence, it's not going to be enough to just dump all of this content into one big folder and say, I'll search for it later. I don't think we're there yet. And what I find time and time again is you don't have to, that word organize is like, oh, organize. Like, is that really adding value? Is that really necessary? What I find time and time again is when people are starting a project and they want to know, do I have something existing that I could use for this? They ask 2 questions. They ask, what have I done like this before? And they say, what do I know on this topic? Just 2 simple questions, which implies there's a very simple organizational scheme you can use in organizing your work in process content, which is by project and by topic. And finally, composable. This is probably the thing you least thought you would hear at a developer conference. But I think, and it's also the most ambiguous part, right? It really depends. This is essentially the creative process. It really depends if you're a coder, if you're an artist, if you're a writer, if you're a musician. But I think the way to get better at composability, to make our work more composable, is to practice composing. You can do a few next, like 4. Okay, this can include seeing. Actually practicing, training, getting good at switching contexts, getting feedback from your colleagues, from outside collaborators, from customers. Interviews, user interviews, interviews of others. It includes writing, right? Tweet storms, which is my personal favorite. If you follow me on Twitter, get ready for some really long tweet storms, I'm sorry. Taking good notes, writing, right? Writing is this process of externalizing your thoughts, and it helps clarify your entire creative process to get that writing published. Drawing, right? Visual thinking, explaining things, making diagrams, making abstract ideas more tangible. Performing, okay, now it starts to get, performing, right? But I think when you take that step to get on a stage, to really stand in front of people and say, I know what I'm talking about, your knowledge, what you know, your performance, your productivity takes on a whole new level because you're forced to stand for something. So this could include, nothing that crazy, speaking at an event, speaking at a meetup, or recording a video. Don't even have to get in front of people. We have YouTube and Periscope and Twitter and all these things. Producing, right? Actually publishing, releasing early and releasing often to the outside world. Summarizing or condensing someone else's ideas. Interpreting them or critiquing them. Or even just translating from one medium to another. And finally, selling, right? When you put yourself and your work on the line to sell them, and I mean selling for money, but also selling your ideas, teaching, or selling your projects, which is collaborating, right? This is kind of a spectrum from like more private to more public, less engaged to more engaged, right? This is what I think composability looks like in the broader world of knowledge work, and it's something most knowledge workers do not do, right? Yeah, we have blogs. Social media is pushing everyone in this direction, but what would it look like if we were all constantly pushing out valuable work to help others learn, to help others advance, to clarify our own thinking, the thinking of others? I think the world would look very different. And I think the benefits this would bring to knowledge work are some of the same benefits that you've experienced over the last years in software development. Abstraction, right? Imagine if kind of general knowledge work had abstraction. you could separate content from presentation. Flexibility, late binding, right? What if instead of creating everything from scratch, from zero up front, knowledge workers around the world could just create modules, spend all of their time producing and documenting modules, and then right when the problem arose, right at the point where a solution is needed, they could just snap together different modules of content that they've already produced. Reusability. Like I said, instead of starting from scratch, instead of starting from zero, you could basically bootstrap projects, just like Bootstrap and other front-end frameworks, where you have like 80% of the basics set up for you, and you just build on top of that. A single source of truth, instead of duplicate, like having 16 versions of every single document, and then you upload it on Box and no one knows what the heck is going on, right? We're making progress on that. But if there was a single source of truth where anyone, say in a team or in an organization, could, almost like an API, link to and pull a piece of knowledge, a piece of content, on demand as needed, in a format using an interface that they could, that they knew was predictable, that they knew they could rely on. Simultaneous development, right? We could break out these heavy lifts into smaller pieces, which would improve collaboration. It would improve remote work, right? If you could just send one module out to a developer around the world, get it back, and with having a clean interface, know how that was going to be integrated back into your work. All of this happens today, but it's very, very messy, right? Very messy. And a focus on incremental changes. I love what I've been reading on the virtual DOM and tree reconciliation, how you don't have to refresh every time. And how often is knowledge work like that, right? A new hire joins the company. You have to teach them everything, like take your time, sit with them to educate them from 0 to 100, right? And then another person comes online. We're always starting from nothing for some reason in knowledge work, and knowledge work doesn't have to be that way. It could be reusable because it's just information. It's just knowledge. And linking this back to flow. This isn't just about more productivity, right? It's not just about let's get more work done with even fewer people, right? There's actually something about the fundamental experience of work here, okay? Because if you look at the 3 internal triggers for flow, the ones that we have control over, they all become much easier when work is broken down into packets, right? It's much easier to make a clear goal for one little module that you're creating rather than a massive project, right? It's much easier to get immediate feedback on one little module, one document, one analysis, one presentation, whatever it is, than to wait weeks or months for it to go to the market and get feedback. And it's much easier to calibrate exactly how hard something should be for one little module than a massive project. Okay? I think that software developers probably have access to flow more than maybe any other profession, right? Because you have these things, okay? But flow today, I think, is a privilege. It's a rare privilege for hyper-educated and hyper-specialized knowledge workers like us, right? Imagine if that experience was more common. If more people all around the world, lawyers, accountants, doctors, analysts, personal assistants, everyone, was able to not force themselves into a way of working that involved a heavy lift, but was able to structure their work to produce the psychological effects that they're interested in. So this is the problem that I'm focused on right now, which I call personal knowledge management. You probably never heard of personal knowledge management. You can check out the Wikipedia article. But I imagine a future where we are not just knowledge workers, like there on the production line, like working our knowledge, okay, new product, working our knowledge. We're actually knowledge managers. So we take a couple steps back from the production line. We're like the foreman up on the catwalk looking down on his knowledge workers. And the knowledge workers would be systems, would be technological systems, would be the different sort of like organizational systems that I'm talking about here. We can gain more leverage, more speed, and more throughput from the tools at our disposal, which, as we're learning here, are getting more and more advanced every year. So I'm here because I need help, okay? I can read some articles and do some little tutorials and listen to talks, but as you could probably tell, I don't have the real world experience to make the mappings between what's going on in software and what's going on in other types of work. So if you're interested in this, or you'd like to learn more, or you think there's something I've missed, you have some feedback for me, I'd really, really love for you to reach out to me. This site is not live yet, but by the end of the conference, it will be. It'll have these slides with my commentary, right? Once I have the recording of this talk, I'll post the video as well. It's going to have, it's almost finished, a blog post on sort of what would the next stage be like if we had modular knowledge work, how we would actually complete projects. And I have my contact information, which is also here. Really encourage you to come talk to me, come find me. Join me during my AMA at 4 o'clock, and otherwise find me online or on Twitter. Thank you.